Let's just get it out of the way. I know what you're thinking when you hear a story like mine. She had a good man and threw it all away. She's selfish. She'll regret it. And maybe you're right. On some nights, when the silence in my apartment gets too loud, I almost believe you. But honestly, I lived my 20s like they were meant to be lived, and I'm not going to apologize for it. My name is Cora. I'm 31. And yeah, I had fun. A lot of fun. But now, everyone acts like I should just magically flip a switch and become some blissfully boring suburban wife who gets a thrill out of Target runs and binge-watching Netflix. That's not how attraction works. It's not how I work. You can't just rewire your soul because society hands you a timeline. I met Graham 3 years ago when I was trying to do exactly that. Be the good girl everyone, especially my best friend Paige, expected me to become. He worked in logistics, had his life perfectly organized, a steady income, a nice, minimalist apartment that always smelled faintly of sandalwood. On paper, on paper he was perfect. He was everything my therapist at the time said I should want. So I tried to want him. I really, really did. Surprise. Graham's voice was soft, laced with that earnest, Boy Scout pride that always made my stomach clench with a confusing mix of affection and pity. I stood in the doorway of our living room, my work tote still slung over my shoulder. He'd transformed the space. A checkered blanket was spread out on the floor, surrounded by flickering LED candles. In the center was takeout from my favorite Thai place, the containers perfectly arranged next to 2 wine glasses. A quiet, acoustic playlist was drifting from the Sonos speaker. Our Friday night. Planned. Perfect. Predictable. Graham, you did all this? I asked, forcing a brightness into my voice that felt like swallowing glass. Just thought we could use a cozy night in, he said, his smile so genuine it was almost painful. He walked over and took my bag, his movements efficient and gentle. Always so gentle. Long week? The usual, I murmured, letting him guide me to the blanket. We sat down, and he poured the wine. He'd remembered the Sauvignon Blanc I'd mentioned liking weeks ago. Of course he did. Graham remembered everything. The name of my childhood pet, my weird allergy to cashews, the exact date of our first text exchange. His mind was a database of our relationship, and sometimes I felt less like his girlfriend and more like his most treasured project. He clinked his glass against mine. To us. I smiled and took a sip. The wine was cold, crisp. But it did nothing to numb the feeling that was slowly creeping up my spine. The feeling of being trapped. He started talking about his day. A problem with a shipment from Singapore, a spreadsheet that wasn't balancing. He spoke with a quiet confidence, the way a man does when he knows his place in the world. He was good at what he did. He was good at everything. I'd nod and say, and, wow, really? At all the right moments. But inside, I was screaming. This wasn't the life I wanted. This quiet, scheduled, suffocatingly nice existence. This was the life everyone else wanted for me. Paige, who'd married her college sweetheart at 24, would constantly remind me how lucky I was. He's so stable, Cora. A guy like Graham is a unicorn these days. Easy for her to say. Paige never knew a life outside of that stability. She settled before she even knew what else was out there. She never experienced real, chaotic, breathtaking passion, the kind that makes you forget your own name. Graham was safe. He was the kind of guy who would never hurt me, never cheat, never disappear for 3 days on a whim without calling. But safe doesn't make your heart pound against your ribs. Safe doesn't give you butterflies. Safe, after years of living on the edge, feels a lot like being buried alive. He reached over and tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear. His touch was warm, familiar. It felt like coming home to a house you never wanted to live in. You seem quiet tonight, he said, his brow furrowed with that signature concern. Everything okay? I wanted to say, no, nothing is okay. I feel like I'm playing a role in someone else's life. Your kindness feels like a cage, and I'm rattling the bars. Instead, I gave him the smile I'd perfected over the last 2 years. Just tired, I said. It was a really long week. He accepted it, of course. He always did. He squeezed my hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on my skin. Well, relax. I'll take care of everything. And that was the problem. He always did. Later that night, as he slept beside me, his breathing even and steady, I stared at the ceiling. I felt the weight of his goodness, of this perfect life we were building, pressing down on me. It was a beautiful prison, a gilded cage, and all I could think about was escape. I wasn't always like this. I wasn't born craving chaos. Or maybe I was. From 18 to about 27, I was what you'd politely call a free spirit. Less politely, a party girl. A mess, but a happy one. My 20s were a blur of late nights, loud music, and a rotating cast of men who were as beautiful as they were temporary. There was the musician with tattoos that snaked up his arms, who would write songs about me and then disappear for a week. There was the bartender who made me laugh so hard I'd cry, who would show up at my apartment at 3 a.m. with cheap pizza and cheaper whiskey. They were unpredictable, electric. They kept me guessing. And I loved it. I lived without regrets. I wasn't looking for a husband. I was collecting experiences. Each relationship, each fling, was a different flavor of life. And I wanted to taste them all. I wasn't going to apologize for it then, and I'm not going to apologize for it now. But somewhere around my 27th birthday, a switch flipped. It wasn't inside me. It was in the world around me. Suddenly, everyone was coupling up. Paige's wedding was a cascade of engagement announcements and baby bump whispers. My social media feed transformed from pictures of parties into a curated gallery of diamond rings and ultrasound photos. The narrative was clear. If you want to be taken seriously, as an adult woman, you need to find your person. Settle down. Stop the nonsense. The pressure was immense. It was in Paige's gentle questions about my dating life. It was in my mom's hopeful sighs over the phone. It was in the pitying looks from couples when I showed up to a dinner party alone. So, I tried. I really did. I deleted the numbers of the beautiful, temporary men. I started saying no to weeknight bar hopping. I tried to want what everyone else seemed to want so effortlessly. And then I met Graham. It was at a coffee shop near my office. He was in line behind me, and I'd forgotten my wallet. Before I could even feel the flush of embarrassment, he'd stepped forward. I've got this. He wasn't my type. At all. He was clean-cut, wore a sensible watch, and his smile was polite instead of mischievous. But he asked thoughtful questions. He listened more than he talked. He had a stable career and wasn't trying to get me into bed on the first date. He was relationship material. The kind of guy you bring home to meet your parents. Paige was ecstatic. He sounds perfect, Cora. Don't screw this up. So I didn't. We started dating, and everything was fine. He was attentive. He remembered details from our first conversation. He planned nice dates to art museums and farmers markets. But there was something missing. That spark. That visceral, undeniable pull that makes you think about someone constantly when they're not around. With Graham, I felt comfortable. I felt cared for. But comfort isn't passion. Still, I kept telling myself this was what mature relationships looked like. Maybe the butterflies and the heart-pounding excitement were just immature fantasies. Maybe real. Lasting love was supposed to feel safe and predictable. Everyone certainly seemed to think so. When he suggested we move in together after 8 months, it made practical sense. We were spending most nights together anyway, and splitting rent in the city would save us both a fortune. It's the natural next step in a serious relationship, Paige had advised, as if she were reading from a manual. So we found a decent 2-bedroom apartment and started playing house. And that's when the suffocation really began. Living with Graham was like being wrapped in cotton wool. Soft, safe, and completely airless. He had routines for everything, a life optimized for maximum efficiency and minimal disruption. Sunday was grocery shopping and meal prep for the week. He had a laminated list he'd check off with a dry erase marker. Thursday was date night. Usually dinner at a reasonably priced, well-reviewed restaurant, followed by a movie at home. Saturday mornings were for the gym, followed by errands. He wanted to do everything together, as if being in a relationship meant merging into one single entity instead of two separate people choosing to share a path. I started to feel claustrophobic. But whenever I tried to express this, to carve out a little space for myself, he'd get this concerned, wounded look in his eyes. Is something wrong? We can talk about it. Let's work through it together. God. The talking. Everything had to be discussed, analyzed, resolved. It was like living in a permanent couples counseling session. If I was quiet, he wanted to know what I was thinking about. If I wanted an evening to myself to just read a book, he needed to understand why. If I wasn't in the mood for sex, we had to have a gentle, understanding conversation about our intimacy needs and physical connection. The worst part was, he was genuinely trying to be a good boyfriend. He wasn't controlling in a malicious way. He wasn't manipulative. He was just boring. Predictably, suffocatingly, maddeningly boring. And that made me feel like a terrible person for wanting more. His kindness became a weapon. He'd leave little notes in my lunch bag. He'd buy me that weird Swedish licorice I mentioned liking once, 6 months ago. When I'd come home stressed from work, he'd immediately go into solution mode instead of just letting me vent. Okay, let's break this down. What can we do to make tomorrow better? He'd ask, his face a mask of earnest helpfulness. And I wanted to scream that sometimes things just suck and you don't need a damn solution. You just need someone to pour you a glass of wine and say, "Yeah, that sounds awful." I started staying out later. Happy hours with coworkers that stretched into late dinners. Nights at Paige's place, drinking wine and pretending my life was as simple as hers. Graham would text, "Hey, just checking in. Any idea when you'll be home?" And I'd feel this surge of pure, hot irritation. I'm a grown woman. I don't need to check in like some teenager. But if I ever brought this up, he'd get that hurt puppy dog look. "I'm sorry," he'd say, his voice soft. "I was just worried about you. That's all." And just like that, I was the bad guy. The ungrateful, cold-hearted witch who couldn't appreciate a man who cared. The sex became routine, too. Same positions, same time of night, same gentle, accommodating approach. He was so focused on my pleasure, on asking what I wanted, that it became a clinical exercise rather than an act of passion. Honestly, I wanted him to just take charge for once. I wanted unpredictability. I wanted to be desired, not accommodated. But saying that would hurt his feelings. And then we'd have to have another 3-hour conversation about it. I started noticing other men again. When we were out together, my eyes would drift. I'd catch myself looking at the guy at the bar with the worn leather jacket and the dangerous smile. The man with an edge, with mystery, with that raw energy that used to drive me wild. Graham noticed. Of course he did. But his solution wasn't to fight for me, to show a spark of jealousy. His solution was to schedule more activities. "Maybe we should join a rock climbing gym together," he suggested one night. "Or take that cooking class you mentioned." More bonding. More scheduled togetherness. As if boredom was something you could cure with a calendar invite. He was trying to fix a crack in the foundation by repainting the walls. And I was dying inside, one perfectly planned day at a time. The breaking point came, as it often does, at a holiday work party. It was Graham's company event, held at a sterile, upscale hotel ballroom. Men in ill-fitting suits and women in conservative cocktail dresses made polite small talk over mediocre wine. I was bored before we even checked our coats. I was making my 5th loop around the room when a colleague of Graham's introduced me to his friend, Declan. And for the first time in years, the air in the room seemed to crackle. He was tall, with dark hair that was just a little too long, and a shadow of a beard. But it wasn't his looks. It was his eyes. They were sharp, intelligent, and held a glint of amusement, as if he knew this was all a ridiculous performance and we were just actors. He had an edge. an energy that made every other man in the room look like a boy. We started talking about books, about travel, about the utter absurdity of corporate parties. The conversation was effortless, electric. I felt a part of myself wake up that had been dormant for 3 years. I was witty. I was charming. I was me. Then, Graham appeared at my elbow, a fresh glass of wine in his hand. "Here you go, honey. I noticed you were running low." He smiled at Declan, a pleasant, territorial smile. "I'm Graham, Cora's other half." I felt a hot flush of embarrassment. Other half, like I was incomplete without him. Declan's lips quirked into a slight smirk. "Declan, good to meet you." The conversation stuttered and died under the weight of Graham's presence. He stayed, hovering, his hand resting on the small of my back. A quiet, constant reminder. She's mine. A few minutes later, when Graham excused himself to talk to his boss, Declan leaned in slightly. "Your boyfriend seems..." He paused, searching for the right word, his eyes dancing with mischief, attentive. The way he said it made it clear what he really meant. Controlling. Suffocating. And in that moment, seeing my relationship reflected in the eyes of a stranger I was intensely attracted to, I felt a profound sense of shame. Later that night, as we drove home in silence, Graham finally spoke. "You seemed distant at the party. Is everything okay?" And I just snapped. "I felt like I couldn't breathe, Graham," the words tumbled out, sharp and bitter. "I can't even have a conversation with someone for 5 minutes without you hovering over me, marking your territory." He looked genuinely confused, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. "Hovering? I was just being a good boyfriend. I was bringing you a drink." "Maybe that's the problem." I shot back, my voice rising. "Maybe I don't want a good boyfriend. Maybe I want a partner who trusts me to exist on my own for 10 damn minutes." The hurt in his eyes should have made me feel guilty. Instead, all I felt was a wave of dizzying relief. Finally, a real emotion. A crack in the perfect, placid surface of our relationship. That night, for the first time, we went to bed without talking it through. And in the silence, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the end. But I also knew I needed a catalyst. A push. Lying in the dark, the screen of my phone glowing under the covers, my fingers typed a name I hadn't written in years. Zane. "Hey stranger," I wrote. "Long time no see." His reply came back almost instantly. "Cora, my favorite kind of trouble. To what do I owe the honor?" My heart hammered in my chest. It was a dangerous, thrilling, terrifying feeling. It was the feeling of being alive. Meeting Zane was like stepping back in time and coming home all at once. We met at a dive bar, the kind of place Graham would never set foot in. It was dark and loud and smelled like stale beer. It was perfect. Zane hadn't changed. He still had that reckless grin, that look in his eye that promised adventure and probably a little bit of heartbreak. He was everything Graham wasn't. Spontaneous. Exciting. A little dangerous. We talked for hours, and for the first time in months, I felt seen. He didn't want to analyze my feelings or plan our future. He just wanted to be in the moment. When he leaned across the sticky table and suggested we go back to his place, I didn't even hesitate. Being with him felt like coming back to life after being in a coma. It was raw and passionate and gloriously uncomplicated. He looked at me like he actually wanted me, not just like he wanted to take care of me. This was what I had been missing. This was what I craved. I told myself it was just one night. A moment of clarity. A way to figure out what I really wanted. But one night became 2. Then a week of stolen afternoons and late-night texts. I was living a double life, and the guilt was eating at me, but it was a strange kind of guilt. It wasn't about hurting Graham. It was about the fact that I wasn't feeling guilty enough. Part of me felt like he deserved it, for making me feel so dead inside. He knew something was wrong. He kept trying to fix us with more communication, more effort, more of everything that was already choking me. Then came the final suggestion. I think we should try couples therapy, he said one evening, his voice full of that damn reasonableness. I almost laughed in his face. Therapy wasn't going to make him interesting. It wasn't going to give him the edge I craved. It couldn't create chemistry where there was none. That's when he saw it. A notification on my phone, which I'd carelessly left on the coffee table. A text from Zane. The preview was just a few words, but they were enough. He picked up the phone. His movements were slow, deliberate. I didn't stop him. In a way, I was relieved. He read the messages, his face unreadable. I braced myself for yelling, for accusations, for a fight, for anything. He put the phone down gently. He looked at me, and his eyes weren't angry. They were just sad, broken. We need to work on this, he said, his voice quiet. We can fix this, Cora. And that was it. That was the moment I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was with the wrong man. A real man, the kind of man I used to know, would have gotten angry. He would have yelled. He would have thrown the phone against the wall. He would have shown some fire. Graham just wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss the terms of my betrayal. There's nothing to fix, Graham, I said, my voice finally steady. We're done. The conversation lasted for hours. It was a circular, painful marathon of him trying to understand, and me trying to explain something that was fundamentally emotional, not logical. What does he have that I don't? He asked, the question laced with genuine confusion. It's not about what he has, I tried to explain. It's about chemistry. It's about a spark. We just want different things. I can change, he pleaded. I can be more spontaneous. And that was the saddest part of it all. He thought passion was something you could add to a to-do list. You can't change your fundamental nature, Graham, and I can't change mine. So all this time, you've just been pretending? He finally asked, his voice cracking. And I realized that, in a way, I had been. I'd been playing the role of the grateful girlfriend, the woman who was so lucky to have landed a stable man. But the whole time, I'd been dying inside from the boredom. He moved out within 2 weeks. He was civil about the whole thing, dividing our belongings with a spreadsheet, handling the lease professionally. Even in heartbreak, he was maddeningly decent. The day he left, I stood in the empty apartment. The silence was deafening. The gilded cage was finally open. I thought I'd feel free. Instead, I just felt empty. The thrill of freedom, it turns out, has a very short shelf life. My thing with Zane fizzled out within a month. No surprise there. Guys who are exciting and unpredictable at 33 don't usually want anything serious, especially with a woman fresh out of a long-term relationship. I was a fun diversion. I was never the destination. And then the reality hit me, harder than I ever expected. I wasn't 25 anymore. The dating pool had changed. And not in my favor. Most of the good guys my age, the ones worth dating, were already married. The ones who were left often had very good reasons for being single. At 31, I found myself back on the dating apps, swiping through a depressing landscape of men who either looked like they'd never left their mother's basement or were clearly just looking for casual hookups. The few decent ones I matched with seemed to get spooked when they heard I'd just ended a 3-year relationship where we lived together. Nobody wanted to be the rebound guy. Paige tried to be supportive, but I could feel the judgment radiating off her. He was so perfect for you, Cora, she'd say with a sigh. He adored you. And I'd have to bite my tongue to keep from screaming that perfect on paper doesn't mean perfect in reality. She'd found her person early. She couldn't understand why I was still searching for something she'd never even known to look for. She saw a checklist. I saw a feeling. I started going to therapy again, this time for real. My therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Evans, kept trying to get me to examine my patterns, to understand why I sabotaged stable relationships, but I already know why, I told her one session. Because stable is boring. Because predictable doesn't make you feel alive. Because sometimes love just isn't enough if there's no spark. She didn't get it. Nobody did. They all acted like I'd thrown away a winning lottery ticket. They didn't have to live it. They didn't have to pretend to be excited about another perfectly planned Thursday night. They didn't understand what it felt like to be with someone who loved you so much. They wanted to protect you from ever feeling anything intense, including passion, including life itself. The months stretched on, and I found myself in the exact same position I'd been in at 28, when I'd decided to get serious. Single, dating guys who wouldn't commit, feeling that familiar ache of wanting more, but being unable to settle for safe. The only difference was the number, 31. And the window for finding what I wanted felt like it was getting smaller every single day. It was like the universe was forcing me to choose between passion and security. Never both. And I was beginning to think I'd made the wrong choice. It was about a year after the breakup. Paige and I were having brunch. She was picking at her salad, avoiding my gaze, which meant she had something to say that she thought I wouldn't like. "I saw Graham the other day," she said finally, her voice careful. "Oh yeah? How's he doing?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "He looks good," she said. "Really good. Happy." She took a deep breath. "He's engaged, Cora." The fork in my hand stopped halfway to my mouth. Engaged. Wow, was all I could manage. "Her name is Eleanor," Paige continued, the words spilling out now that the seal was broken. "She's a landscape architect. Apparently, she's really sweet. They're planning a garden wedding next spring." She didn't have to say it. The implication was as clear as the mimosa in my glass. She is everything you're not. And more importantly, she wanted exactly what he had to offer. She probably loved his routines, his stability, his gentle, predictable nature. She probably saw his planning not as suffocation, but as care. I felt a strange, conflicting cocktail of emotions. Relief that he had found someone who could appreciate what I couldn't. Vindication that we had been right to break up, because we were clearly wrong for each other. And yes, a small, sharp sting of rejection, even though I was the one who left. But mostly I just felt tired. Tired of being the woman who couldn't settle, who wanted too much, who threw away good things in search of a perfect feeling that might not even exist. Tired of defending my choices to people who thought I was crazy for wanting fire instead of a quiet, steady flame. The thing is, even now, I still don't think I was wrong. I think we're all just wired differently. What feels like a safe harbor to one person feels like a prison to another. Graham needed someone who would appreciate his steady, caring heart. I needed someone who could match my intensity and keep me guessing. Neither of us was the villain in our story. We were just cast in the wrong roles. But try explaining that to a world that tells women they should be grateful for any decent man who wants to commit, regardless of whether there's any actual chemistry. Now, at 31, I'm starting to accept that maybe what I want doesn't exist, or maybe I waited too long to find it. Maybe the choices I made in my 20s, prioritizing fun and excitement over building something lasting, have consequences I'm only now beginning to understand. But I still can't bring myself to regret those choices. They made me who I am. Friends, like Paige, still hint that maybe I made a mistake. They wait for me to show some remorse, to break down and admit I should have stayed. But I'm not sorry. I'm sad things didn't work out differently. I'm sad I hurt a good man. But I'm not sorry for wanting more than just fine. Maybe that makes me selfish. But at least I'm honest about what I want, even if what I want seems to be a ghost. I would rather be alone and true to myself than in a relationship that feels like a slow, comfortable death. Even if that relationship looks perfect to everyone on the outside. Even if it means I'll be alone for a very, very long time.